Good morning, everyone. Happy Monday to you. Josh is Severe Weather. I'm a meteorologist in Raleigh, North Carolina. We've got two major storms we're tracking this week that are going to produce some extreme amounts of weather. This is going to be one of the busiest weeks of weather we've had in quite some time as a very active storm track continues. Double trouble is what I'm calling it, as one storm in the southern plains today is going to produce widespread severe weather for many of us here on the Gulf Coast into the southeast tomorrow. Heavy rain and strong winds up the eastern seaboard later tomorrow into early Wednesday. And there is a cold side of the storm, which will crank up very heavy rates of snowfall, strong winds, and likely blizzard conditions for some of us in the plains into the Great Lakes and eastern Canada. That is not it, though. This is a buy one, get one deal, unfortunately for us. Another storm likely to follow it. And by the end of the week and start of the weekend, we've got ourselves another major storm, which will have severe weather, heavy rain on the warm side, very strong winds, cold, and snow on the cold side of it, which unfortunately is going to lead to some disastrous travel for some of us here. So here's a look at the areas that I'm worried about. And you can see the map today from the National Weather Service is very colorful, unfortunately. Lots of places that are getting some very much impactful weather. Flash flood watch here for portions of the Northeast, winter weather advisories or watches, I should say, for parts of Maine. And these brown colors indicate high wind watches, which will be warnings pretty soon. There's a cold side of the storm. We've got blizzard warnings in effect from New Mexico to Nebraska. Millions are under this. Winter storm warnings in the pink here from Nebraska and Kansas all the way up to just north of Milwaukee. Watches for northern Michigan. Advisories down through the Chicagoland area all the way down to Indianapolis, and a flash flood watch for parts of the central Gulf states with storm warnings for the waters. The next storm is already bringing blizzard conditions over the next 24 to 48 hours to interior parts of the Northwest, and just a very impactful pair of storms here this week and into the weekend. So, unfortunately, just a very bad week to do any travel coast to coast here. Here's a look at our current water vapor imagery, and this shows us where our storms are. Very intense upper level low spinning near the Four Corners region. That is actually going to dig south and then turn up to the northeast. Actually, it's going to take more of a track like this. And on the warm side of it, we have a lot of moisture coming in. You see this extremely fast subtropical jet. That's sending a lot of these mid and high level clouds into the southeast today into tomorrow, but also indicates very fast winds aloft. So we've got ourselves a pretty high ceiling for strong winds out of this storm. And as this pulls some cold air down with it, we're going to see strong winds and snow across this area and unfortunately blizzard conditions. But here comes the one right behind it. It's going to take a similar track. There will be some subtle differences that I'll kind of give you guys here. And I apologize. This video, my goal this year was to make my videos shorter so people could actually see more. This is not going to be one of those videos, unfortunately, for you guys. Just too much to talk about, and I don't want to ignore folks. So this next storm is going to be kind of following a similar track here. But the difference with that storm is that it's going to follow with a lot colder air. The first one does not have a big amount of cold air following it. The second one does. So blizzard conditions are looking more likely from the second storm than the first across parts of this region here. So that's what we're looking at. This is Radar Omega, shows us the winter weather severity index, winter storm severity index, WSSI, for those of you keeping track at home. And extreme amounts across the Cascades here in the Northwest, high amounts of winter storm impacts across parts of Colorado and Kansas over here, as well as Iowa, Missouri, eastern Nebraska, and parts of Wisconsin, and a medium risk for some dangerous travel, strong impacts over the rest of the plains into the Great Lakes, as well as the interior of the Northeast. And that is just from this first storm. That doesn't even include the one behind it. This is the next 3 days. So through Wednesday, we're talking about some significant impacts. And you'll see down here, we've also got a supercell threat beginning, not so much in deep South Texas, but we are going to start seeing that wind shear picking up. And as the day wears on, we are going to see increasingly favorable conditions for supercells and tornadoes, starting in Southeast Texas, then shifting east overnight tonight across the central Gulf states. And then a second area that's going to shoot up the Carolinas here tomorrow afternoon into early tomorrow night. So a very impactful storm expected here. And I'm going to give you some more detail on who's going to get it and when here in just a second. Here's a look at the predicted radar from the NAM model. You can see here's our storm this morning. This is 9 a.m. Central today. Snow beginning to move into Omaha. Next storm moving into the northwest. Heavy rain at the coast, snow inland. And we'll see a line of showers and storms forming, but it gets busier as the night wears on. More folks see heavy rain and destructive amounts of wind and possible severe weather overnight tonight as the snow moves into Chicago. There's a warm nose here, so we're going to see some rain in places like Chicago and Detroit, cutting back on your snow totals tomorrow. However, it's going to go back to snow at some point here as the cold air wraps in behind it. So not a major snowstorm for Detroit. Chicago's close, but north and west of these areas is where we see the heaviest. Tomorrow, we see a destructive squall line potential from Virginia down into Florida here. This is 7 p.m. tomorrow. Snow across the interior of the Northeast, and then heavy rain for the big cities tomorrow night with flood potential. So not a good night to be traveling in the Northeast tomorrow night. I think Wednesday morning is going to start out pretty rough as well for New England. After that storm moves out, here comes the next one. You can see it's going to take its time dropping through the Northwest. There's kind of two pieces to it. The first piece actually is going to bring a sneaky amount of snow to the Dakotas on Wednesday, but the bigger piece follows it Thursday and Friday into some of the same areas. So I'm going to give you guys kind of some more on that here in a little bit. Here's a GFS model. We see a deep cyclone here tonight over Oklahoma. Lots of warm, moist air coming in off the Gulf. Strong winds with this. Lots of strong winds on the backside of the storm, producing some blizzard conditions. And then here's the next one in the Northwest. So this is two major storms. The Northwest storm splits into two. We've got a northern feature. It's not an extremely cold storm, but one will produce some pretty good snow rates over parts of the prairies into the Dakotas here on Wednesday. But the big picture storm is on the East Coast here on Wednesday. The next storm dives down, and next Friday looks kind of similar to what today is going to look like. There's going to be some differences. This model is showing two things different than this first storm. One is that the pressure is going to be lower with this, meaning more wind potential on the cold side. And the second piece is that we've got a powerful high pressure system bringing some very cold air, the coldest of the season, down. And that's going to invade the Rockies here before the end of the week and drop down into the plains and the Great Lakes behind the storm. And as that cold air rushes in, you see how these white solid lines here really are tight, basically from Saskatchewan all the way to Ontario and Ohio. This indicates an extreme amount of wind instability with it. We're going to see a lot of blizzard conditions here. Even if we don't see an all-out record snowfall, we're going to see blizzard conditions due to the fact that winds will be ripping here behind this storm system. The cold air floods in, and just some very dangerous weather. And this will also produce some blizzard conditions possibly on the front side of the storm before it even gets colder in Maine and New Brunswick and southeastern parts of Quebec, with rain possible to places like Montreal and Ottawa here during the height of the storm on Saturday morning. And unfortunately, another storm next week. I'm not even going to get too much into the weeds with that, but this one looks like a big rainmaker for the Pac Northwest. And with that cold air dropping down, I think we're going to see an ice storm in places like Seattle and Portland, but more on that in days to come here. All right, let's talk about some specifics. Lots of rain coming over the next 10 days. Much of the East is going to be well above average on rain. The Northwest gets crushed. California does not really get a whole lot of rain once you get south of the Bay Area. It's going to be kind of dry. As well as the Southwest. This is primarily plains on eastward here with the significant amounts of rain, but snow is going to pile up. I talked about it a few days ago, but feet of snow coming here in the next week. You can see just incredible amounts of snow, over a foot from Colorado on north and east into Quebec. Not yet getting into the big cities of the Northeast. I know we keep kind of getting teased with these snowstorms, but they go over to rain on the Northeast. I think that's going to change some more here after this weekend, as we see that cold air mass shifting east, but we're not there yet. We are going to see impactful weather, though, unfortunately. The Northwest just gets blasted with snow. I think some places are looking at 6 feet of snow in the next week in the mountains. So the ski areas will be happy with that, if it's even safe to get up to them, because that's the other concern. But we continue to see the amount of snow dropping south and east. And those of you that have not seen snow in a couple of winters are starting to see some increased chances for that after this week. Here's a look at a comparison. The Europeans on the left and the GFS is on the right. This is 24-hour snow. And as you can see, the GFS has some higher snow totals than the European in the next day. We've got potentially close to 2 feet in western Kansas, whereas the European says 16 inches. Regardless, it's a big storm, but there are some detailed differences between the two, even here in the shorter range. As we move on into tonight and tomorrow, though, you can see, generally speaking, Iowa is in for a very major snowstorm. Northern Missouri as well, at least 6 to 8 inches of snow, if not more, and you're going to tack on wind on top of that. And then the snow totals start to tail off once we get close to Lake Michigan, as the warm air gets involved into the storm here tomorrow morning. We see totals that are going to be much higher north and west in Chicago than on the south side of Chicago. So keep that in mind. There will be some snow, but the totals are obviously going to be a lot higher. And if you're in Indianapolis or Champaign, We're right on the line between what could be a ripoff and just a little bit of snow and maybe a more significant, substantial snowfall. So anyway, this is snowfall tomorrow. And then after we get past that, we do see the storm moving through the Dakotas. And then here comes the next one, blasting Salt Lake City and the Colorado Rockies here Wednesday night into Thursday. And that's going to drop down and produce a pretty major area of heavy snow. Some differences where the GFS is more aggressive on snow across Missouri here on Friday. The European is more aggressive in Nebraska, but nonetheless, this is snow that'll be accompanied by very strong wind, and it's going to put down some really nasty weather and going to get a lot colder with it. So these are the kind of storms that produce the multi-vehicle accidents if you're out in them, because of the fact that road conditions worsen very quickly. Temperatures drop too fast for the Department of Transportation folks to be able to treat the roads the way they really need to, due to those fast falling temperatures as well as the wind. So major storm here on Friday. Friday night, we're getting blasted, and big differences between the GFS, which shows near a foot in St. Louis and Chicago. The European, a little more progressive, but nonetheless, Michigan's getting clobbered here as we get to Friday and Friday night. Wisconsin gets clobbered, and Illinois looks like it's going to get hit very hard here. So we'll have more on this coming up, but I think we are definitely talking about a blizzard in some of these bigger cities here in the Great Lakes region Friday night. So looking farther east, we see pretty big snowfall coming in here. I've already kind of talked about the Great Lakes, Canada getting crushed. Interestingly, there is some front end snow for New England that's going to pile on top of what you just got here this weekend. Parts of New Hampshire, upstate New York into Western Maine do have the potential to see over a foot of snow here before a changeover. And there'll be some ice in this transition as well. That's going to be tomorrow night into first part of Wednesday. But for the big cities, this is a no storm. It's just going to be tons of rain for you here. As we get on into the following storm, there will be, again, more snow coming into some of the same spots. But generally speaking, the track of the next storm is farther north and west. So the heavier amounts of snow stay north of the U.S.-Canadian border. However, we'll probably have some lake effect behind it. So those of you in the snow belts, be preparing for that as we get into Saturday night and Sunday. It looks like the south side of Buffalo gets hit. And that could impact some travel plans for those of you this weekend in Buffalo and Erie, in northeastern parts of Ohio, as well as off of Lake Michigan and off of Lake Huron. And I don't want to forget Lake Superior, the biggest of the Great Lakes. We have the potential to see over a foot of snow in less than 12 hours coming here early in the weekend. Winds are going to be a big deal as well. Very powerful winds on the Gulf Coast. Gusts will be up to 60 miles per hour here tonight and early tomorrow in coastal Florida, coastal Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana. Expect power outages there, and that's not even thunderstorm related wind. That's wind from the actual cyclone itself. Those winds do move up to the north and east, and tomorrow afternoon, we're going to see widespread wind gusts over 60 miles per hour from western Florida into the mid-Atlantic region and up into the Great Lakes. Talked with a few other colleagues in the field. I would not be shocked if schools got canceled or let out early tomorrow here in the Carolinas due to the high winds, as it will be dangerous for those school buses to be out on the roads. They just can't handle that kind of high profile wind. And that could be a problem Wednesday as well across New England. Winds get up to over 70 miles per hour on the coast. And yet again, we're getting blasted with an atmospheric river and strong winds for coastal New England, just like we saw back in the middle of December. The same exact places need to be preparing for that same kind of weather again here later tomorrow night into the first part of Wednesday. The next storm is going to have a lot of wind with it as well. Tough to say exactly how much, when, and where, but you can see 40 to 50 mile per hour winds as it's snowing here on the backside of this next storm system. Precipitation amounts look to be pretty heavy here. We've got a widespread area of over 2 inches of rain. Some places will pick up 5 or 6 in parts of Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, upstate South Carolina, western North Carolina, Virginia, right on up the I-95 corridor. Lots of rain coming. And we get hit again here this Friday night and Saturday. And over the next week, we are looking at potential rainfall totals across over a third of the country exceeding 3 inches. And that's the last thing we really want to see, because it's just been so wet. I mean, December was incredibly wet. Unfortunately, January looks to start off that way. We may see some break coming later in the month, but we've got to get through at least the next week, week and a half before that happens. In Florida, I don't think we're talking about as much rain. There is some severe potential down there, but I don't think we're talking about washouts like we're seeing farther up into the Gulf Coast region and up the Atlantic coastline. I don't want to ignore you in the Northwest. I talked about it already, but heavy rain across the Northwest, very heavy snow for the mountains. This is going to be a top 10th percentile kind of storm. in the northwest here the next couple of days. And then as we get to the following storm, we look at potentially a major icing event for parts of western Washington, northwestern Oregon. And a lot of that time frame looks like it's going to be Friday night and Saturday for the Pacific Northwest. So expect delays in Seattle and Portland if you are planning any travel plans out there, and a major snowfall for the mountains as well. Let's talk about severe weather. I don't want to ignore this threat. It is climbing. We now have an enhanced risk, 3 out of 5, late today into tonight. The threat for severe weather starts in southeast Texas this afternoon, then spreads eastward this evening across much of South Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama, and then overnight into western Florida. And let's take a look at some of the detail on this. We do have, and I'm going to show you some forecast guidance in a little bit, but we do have an enhanced risk for some stronger tornadoes tonight, and definitely nocturnal tornadoes, the kind that can cause major issues. So if you're anywhere in this hashed area, Baton Rouge, Houma, Thibodaux, New Orleans, Lafayette, Mobile, Pascagoula, Biloxi, Gulfport, all the way over to Destin, Florida, Pensacola, you do need to be on the lookout for likely a tornado watch tonight, but potentially a couple of stronger tornadoes, EF2s, EF3s. This is the time of the year when we get these stronger tornadoes. We saw it a lot this time last year. Unfortunately, we're going to see it again here tonight across this region. Severe wind as well. Even if a tornado is not reported, but a tornado warning is issued, there can be destructive wind. And I think the same areas are going to be hit again with this. And even back into Texas, even all the way close to Dallas and Tyler and those areas, Shreveport, need to be on the lookout for some stronger wind. There'll be a threat for hail this afternoon, evening as well in the western half of this area. And then unfortunately, a bigger population center gets hit tomorrow with severe wind and maybe some tornadoes. All of northern Florida is in this risk. Southeastern Alabama, central and south Georgia, much of the Carolinas, all the way up to places like Raleigh, Kitty Hawk, Nags Head have the threat for some destruction here. Powerful tornadoes are possible. I don't think we're going to be talking dozens of them, but we'll have to see. The models can still shift some. We may see an environment that is very conducive for a couple of hours of strong tornadoes. Places like the Midlands of South Carolina, especially the Low Country, even Augusta, all the way up to Wilmington, Fayetteville, maybe even Pinehurst and Raleigh. I mean, especially on the south side of towns, and over into eastern North Carolina, Greenville, Jacksonville, Morehead City, all are at risk of a few stronger tornadoes. Same goes for in the morning and midday hours over parts of the eastern Gulf region into southwestern Georgia. Damaging winds, though, are going to be a more widespread threat all the way up to the Tidewater of Virginia here tomorrow. So some of the same areas are highlighted with those, and there could be some hail early on across the eastern Gulf region. And then next week, or not even next week, 3 days from now, we repeat this process. And this storm's going to look a little bit different, but the setup's going to be similar, where we could see severe weather evolving later Thursday into Thursday night, same areas. And then Friday, just a huge area potentially highlighted for severe weather from Mississippi and Louisiana all the way up into south central parts of Virginia, including South Hill and the Lake Gaston region. So be preparing for that. You can kind of see why on here. Just incredible amounts of wind flow aloft. Look at this cyclone in Oklahoma here tonight. We see wind gusts at 500 millibars that are going to be well over 100 miles per hour, maybe 120 miles per hour. So extreme amounts of wind expected. And this is just going to be a major wind bag as it moves east here tomorrow. All the eastern seaboard sees the wind. And unfortunately, we're not done. Here comes the next piece on Thursday night and Friday. It's going to look kind of similar. There'll be some differences. This particular storm projected to go a little farther north and west, but the wind damage is there. And I think the threat's actually a little bit farther north with this storm than the one that we're dealing with currently here. I should say the next storm. So be preparing for that. We have a lot of storm fuel in place in southeast Texas this afternoon, and that expands eastward tonight across all the Gulf states. It's not an extreme amount of storm fuel, but it's high enough to support destructive storms. And you'll see this is trending more north and west tomorrow, all the way up into North Carolina. So we definitely have the environment for some damaging winds and a few tornadoes as well. The next storm actually has a little bit higher potential with it, but the winds are not quite as strong. There's more storm fuel, but not quite as much wind aloft. Regardless, I think we're talking about another outbreak of severe weather on Friday, and that carries Friday night through the Carolinas into Virginia, and we could even hear thunder all the way up into the Lehigh Valley here early in the day on Saturday. So that's what I'll be watching for you guys here. Here's a look at some of the ingredients in place for tornadoes later on today. We'll see these numbers start climbing around lunchtime. This is about 11 a.m., 12 o'clock here central in the coastal bend of Texas, just west of Houston, and a pretty favorable environment for a few tornadoes later today. But the environment's actually a little bit better as we get into the night tonight. Not so much because the wind shear is going to be higher. It actually won't be, but because we see a little bit more instability. What that means is there's a little more storm fuel lining up with where the stronger wind shear is. So Southeast Louisiana definitely has that threat here overnight tonight, and we see that continuing into Western Florida by daybreak tomorrow. A little bit farther east, we are also going to be talking about a pretty good setup here for severe weather. We see it here. This is midnight tonight, Central Time. This is overnight, continuing through places like Mobile and Pensacola. And then tomorrow morning, we may still have tornado watches for the Florida Panhandle and southeastern parts of Alabama. And you can see there's kind of a second area that we need to keep an eye on, kind of out ahead of this main frontal boundary here. Places like Beaufort County, South Carolina, right on up into Charleston County, do see some enhancement in the wind fields by about lunchtime tomorrow. So there is definitely something that we need to keep. Whoops, hit the wrong button there, but something we definitely need to keep an eye on. And as we head into the afternoon hours, these parameters keep climbing over the eastern half of South Carolina, over central Florida, including Orlando and Tampa Bay, Daytona, and the Space Coast. And then into the early evening hours in places like Wilmington, in Pender County, North Carolina, maybe Raleigh, North Carolina, Knightdale, those areas on eastward here into the early part of tomorrow night. The tornado parameters are not as high farther north, but the wind parameters are still pretty impressive. Here's a look at what the radar may look like on one of our forecast models. And this one is kind of the high end one I'm going to show you, but certainly a possibility. And we're going to see isolated potential supercells popping up this afternoon in the Houston area, continuing into this evening. And, you know, it looks like Houston could get hit twice, but potentially 5, 6 o'clock. And I'm not a huge sports fan, but I know there's a major game going on tonight. As people are trying to get into the stadium, we do have a pretty good potential here for some destructive storms. So I really hope those folks are at least on the lookout for that, not just obsessing about the game, because I know you want to get there, but being very mindful of the weather that could impact you when you're trying to get there. So keep that in mind as the afternoon and evening progresses. This is going to shift eastward, and we'll move into Louisiana here tonight. And we may see kind of another line of showers and storms, but nothing as intense tonight. Looking farther east into Louisiana and Mississippi, we are going to see multiple waves of heavy rain, heavy thunderstorms, and it's a little bit uncertain on how this is going to unfold, but we could see a little severe weather this afternoon in southeastern Louisiana. There are some potential supercells forming here. It's kind of a messy mode here, though. Just a lot of potential mess on the radar and maybe rain-wrapped tornadoes, believe it or not. So as we head into the evening hours, we see this threat climbing, just multiple waves coming through. Baton Rouge, Lafayette, Slidell, Mandeville, all of you are under the gun here, especially later this evening. This is 10, 11 o'clock. We see the threat into Mississippi. And then as the overnight wears on, this threat does come to an end and takes more aim at southern Alabama here after about 2 in the morning, which could be very bad for places like Mobile overnight tonight. Saw that last winter. Unfortunately, we're seeing that again here. Here's a look at the predicted radar this afternoon. And again, most of the action is south and west of this area. But as we get into tonight, we do see heavy rain. We see lightning. We definitely have some severe threat on the Gulf Coast, climbing north and eastward into the late evening hours, right on up the I-59 corridor, and then into the overnight hours, especially across southern and central Alabama and into northwestern Florida here overnight. That continues into tomorrow morning. I don't know if we're going to see stuff falling apart. This model says 8, 9 in the morning. Things are getting very, very busy along the Chattahoochee River. So Columbus, Phoenix City, be prepared for that all the way down through Dothan into areas just west of Tallahassee. And then that should move away by late morning. Let's take a look at Florida. I know we had some surprise severe weather over the weekend with an EF0 tornado hitting near downtown Fort Lauderdale. Fortunately, wasn't a strong tornado, but one that I know caught some folks off guard. This severe weather potential looks to be a little farther north of South Florida. I'm mainly talking the northern half of the state, but that doesn't mean South Florida is not going to get hit. Here's a look at tonight, and we see some heavy showers and storms lifting away from the region. We're waiting on the cold front, and here it comes, moving into western Florida here around 6 or 7 in the morning. And then this line continues, and there will be enough wind shear for individual, what we call quasi-linear convective system bent storms, which can produce some tornadoes as they come off the Gulf Coast and into the Big Bend region early in the afternoon tomorrow. But I think the threat for severe weather is actually maximized basically from Jacksonville down to especially the Tampa Bay area tomorrow afternoon, 3 to 4 in the afternoon, continuing to I-4 around dinner time. So it could be really nasty if you've got travel plans in the Orlando area around 4 or 5 o'clock. And then that threat continues into the evening, and maybe a second line comes in behind it. And South Florida, I think, escapes the worst from this, but I would not be completely shocked to see a tornado warning or two later tomorrow evening across this area. And don't worry, there'll be a better chance for it as we get into Friday as well. Actually, maybe you should worry, just to be honest with you. I don't want people to worry and freak out, but you need to be on your toes for this storm system. Here's a look at Georgia and South Carolina. Again, I'm just going to go through this a little bit more quickly, but Atlanta, Athens, I think we're talking about mainly heavy rain, some strong winds. But south and east of you tomorrow morning, things are going to get pretty rough in central Georgia, eastern South Carolina, even around the Charlotte area around mid-afternoon. Things could be very nasty with powerful winds and a few tornado warnings, but just multiple waves coming through here. And then things are going to clear out of the state here by the time we get to about 9-10 o'clock tomorrow night. And then finally, North Carolina and Virginia. We may not see as many tornadoes as areas farther south and west, but we definitely have heavy rain coming, which can produce flooding. We also have a strong wind potential, wind gusts exceeding 60 to 70 miles per hour, an enhanced risk for some of these areas. So heavy rain moving in tomorrow morning to western North Carolina and western Virginia. And then as the afternoon wears on, we see multiple showers and storms breaking out across the warm sector. Just kind of a very messy setup here. Let me get back to that. And sorry about that. And the best chance for severe weather looks to be aimed at the Raleigh area on south and east right around dinner time tomorrow. Very heavy rain as well across the Northeast. And speaking of the Northeast, I did want to just kind of show you that entire region. I don't think we're talking about severe weather, but we are going to see some powerful winds across this area. It's just going to be a big mess here. Heavy rain along the Ohio River Valley tomorrow morning. West Virginia, heavy rain. Western PA, there'll be some ice and snow once you get into the elevational areas here. Keep an eye on this line of showers and storms. It could have some powerful winds around 3 or 4 in the afternoon, moving through southern Ohio into western PA, West Virginia, the western Carolinas. A lot of wind expected in the mountains here. Just a very nasty storm. And then behind it, winds are still going to crank, and we'll see a change over to snow showers in the higher elevations. Big time rain and wind tomorrow night. See this kind of line moving through eastern PA. We may have a severe thunderstorm warning without the lightning just because of the fact that there's severe wind coming. That time frame's around midnight for the Delaware Valley, but it looks like just an all-out washout for New England, Long Island here as we get later into tomorrow night. Real quick, I want to show you guys what the model is showing as far as areas that may potentially have rotating thunderstorms. And this is very impressive to see. We do see this in the wintertime, but just a lot of areas that potentially could be under the gun. Anywhere from East Texas all the way into North Carolina has the threat for seeing rotating thunderstorms. So I would love to talk in more detail, but I want to respect your time here. So I really appreciate you all. Thank you so much for joining me today. Please share with your friends if they're in this area, family members. And if you've come to me for the first, second, third time, please consider subscribing. I try to do videos on a daily basis. So I appreciate you all for your time. You guys mean the world to me. I'm a Christian. I pray for all of you. I give all the glory to God. This is his gift to me, to you guys, to bless you all and to prepare you for rough weather. I try to do it and not freaking out the entire world, but there's some days where the weather is going to be unfortunately very severe, and this is going to be one of those days we have to talk about it. But I just want to thank God for giving me the opportunity to do this every day. We have days that are kind of rough in our business, days where it can be very easy to be discouraged. But Paul tells the church of Galatians, Galatians 6:9, King James Version, and let us not be weary in well doing, for in due season we shall reap if we faint not. As we have therefore opportunity, let us do good unto all men, especially unto them who are of the household of faith. And I know we're a week into the new year. A lot of us have set goals, resolutions, some big dreams. We're already getting some discouragement, some pushback on those, and that's perfectly normal. But the Lord tells us through Paul that we need to not be weary. We need to continue to do good and trust in the Lord. As a result, he is going to bless us in many ways. It's not going to be on our time. It's going to be on his time. But God is good. And raise your hand in your head if God's been good to you, because I know he has been to me in many ways. And whether or not you're a believer, I think this just holds true in general, that people who put in the work day after day after day are going to see the results. I just want to encourage you to continue to do that no matter what your goals are, but to understand as well that the results come on God's time. So let's let go and let God do our work for us. Hope you all have a wonderful day, and I will catch up with you again tomorrow morning. Please be safe out there, and we'll catch up soon. I'm happy to pray for you if you want to list a prayer request as well. I do not take those lightly. I am going to be praying for you, all of you that are going through things as well. Thank you all. Have a wonderful Monday. See you tomorrow.